Good morning, or whatever the hell it is. Welcome to Housing Revolution, Part 1, Chapter 3, Feudalism and Abraham Lincoln. This is the follow-up to this week's previous videos, Feudalism and the Founding Fathers' Big Conflict, and Feudalism and Thomas Jefferson. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I suggest you watch them first. Okay, so we're going to talk about a quote from Abraham Lincoln from the book Abraham Lincoln and the Men of His Time by Robert Brown, M.D. The book has a collection of conversations the doctor had with Abraham Lincoln, conversations Dr. Brown would later go home and write out. So when I did a little research about this particular passage, there seems to be agreement among experts that while the doctor's audiographic memory may not have been correct word for word, it is an accurate representation of Lincoln's views at the time. A little research on Lincoln's Homestead Act confirms this. So here it is. Abraham Lincoln. The land, the earth that God gave to man for his home, his sustenance, and support should never be the possession of any man, corporation, society, or unfriendly government any more than the air or the water, if as much. An individual company or enterprise requiring land should hold no more in their own right than is needed for their home and sustenance, and never more than they have in actual use in the prudent management of their legitimate business, and this much should not be permitted when it creates an exclusive monopoly. All that is not so used should be held for the free use of every family to make homesteads, and to hold them as long as they are so occupied. Where the hell did we go so wrong? So let's break that down a bit. First of all, the land, the earth, God gave to man for his home, sustenance, and support. So yeah, it is kind of a Homo sapiens-centric point of view, a la the sun and stars all rotate around man. But similar to Thomas Jefferson, Lincoln seems to believe the earth and its land are a gift from God to all people to support and sustain all human life. He continues, the land, the earth, God gave to man for his home, sustenance, and support should never be the possession of any man, corporation, society, or unfriendly government any more than the air or water, if as much. So this is a little confusing. Does he believe no one should be able to own land? Well, that would contradict with Lincoln's Homestead Act that enabled Western settlers to purchase the title on 160 acres of land out west, provided the settlers farmed the land, built a home, and made improvements to the land for 6 months and commit to continuing to do so for another 4.5 years. So yeah, you should be able to own land, according to Abraham Lincoln. The next sentence gives us some more clues. An individual company or enterprise requiring land should hold no more in their own right than is needed for their home and sustenance, and never more than they have in actual use in the prudent management of their legitimate business, and this much should not be permitted when it creates an exclusive monopoly. All that is not so used should be held for the free use of every family to make homesteads, and to hold them as long as they are so occupied. So these first two sentences are saying no one should be able to control more land than they need for their own home, sustenance, and running a legitimate business. So what constitutes a legitimate business? Well, I imagine that would be businesses producing real goods and putting time and energy into providing real services. Given Lincoln's views on land speculation, businesses acquiring land to later sell the land off for a profit or rent it out to others in need of land, that would not qualify. Now, this passage is a very take what you need and leave the rest-ish point of view. In fact, it's a very take only what you truly need and leave the rest-ish point of view. So the last sentence, all that is not so used should be held for the free use of every family to make homesteads and to hold them so long as they are occupied, is a precursor to Lincoln's Homestead Act. Now, of course, the Homestead Act was only made possible by shoving the Native Americans onto reservations in order to open the land to be settled. So look, this isn't a history channel, but hopefully you've noticed that when we do talk about history, we're not going to give the sugar-coated America has never done anything wrong version so many of us got in school and still get from the mainstream media. So a couple of points about the last sentence. Notice Lincoln says, every family. Again, it's very similar to Jefferson saying the land was common stock for all men. And at the end, he adds a condition. The right to control the land would last as long as one was occupying the land. Very similar to Madison at the Constitutional Convention when he gave laboring and making improvements to the land as qualifications that would warrant the protection of one's ownership of land. All right, so what do we have here so far in the Housing Revolution video series about feudalism? Well, the Founding Fathers abhorred feudalism and felt it was oppressive. They envisioned a new country without feudalism, in which laborers got to keep the fruits of their own labors. They felt this would motivate industry and productivity, making for a thriving, self-sustaining country. But they were conflicted. Being the big landowners themselves, they were frightened of the prospects of the non-landowners becoming the majority and voting away their land. So they set in place strong property protections for landowners like themselves. This all would have been well and fine if they had placed limits on how much land one individual could own and had put into place qualifications, such as Madison's requirements, that owners be laboring and improving the land in order to be afforded the strong property protections they put into place. This failure to limit the amount of land an individual could own, and that would be protected, paved the way for the new feudalism. A new feudalism in which the crown, nobility, and vassals, etc., were replaced by private citizens and eventually private corporations as the new feudal lords. The underlying mechanism of the old feudalism, a person or group of people controlling more land than needed for their own personal use, and then using the leverage of that land to siphon off the fruits of others' labors via rent, would remain firmly intact. Now, Thomas Jefferson saw the prospects of the new feudalism and proposed a geometric property tax that would have lessened the inevitable land inequality we have today by limiting the economic incentive to hoard land. Lincoln and Jefferson both revered the land as a gift to man from nature or from God. By Lincoln's time, land speculation and hoarding were becoming legitimate problems. His view was that no one should be allowed to own land they were not physically living or working on, and that no one should be allowed to hold more land than they needed for their home, sustenance, and legitimate business. So, what does this have to do with housing? Well, the new feudalism, Feudalism 2.0, is thriving today. Our unlimited feudalistic property laws enable those with the means to hoard land to take more than they need and to use the leverage of this vital resource to extract exploitative amounts of the fruits of labors from those who are laboring in the real economy, who are producing real goods, and who are providing legitimate services. It has set up a system where the landowners, landlords, and real estate investors are able to generate wealth not by laboring, not by producing, not by putting time and energy into providing legitimate services, but by siphoning off the fruits of those who are laboring. Despite this being the oppression the Founding Fathers had hoped to avoid, we are living it today. We are also living the plethora of negative side effects of trickle-down impacts that the Founding Fathers could not have predicted, as our mortgage system on steroids has created a monster beyond their wildest imagination. We will dive into these side effects next week after we talk about economic basics like money, supply, inflation, supply and demand. But after next week, anytime you hear things like the inflationary effects of supply and demand are limited by or unleashed by the money supply, you are totally going to understand it. No, like totally, dude. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap up Housing Revolution Part 1 with a summary of feudalism and some insights to its modern day implications. All right, that's it. Please share with your friends and loved ones who are burdened by housing, even your employers who are burdened with having to pay wages high enough so that their employees can afford housing. And remember to lick the hype button, subscribe, and always make sure to hit the No Boxtrinations tab. It really helps with the YouTube. All right, see you tomorrow. Over and out.